Thanks everyone for joining. We'll wait just a couple of minutes before we get started so we can make sure we let everyone that's waiting into the room. But welcome. While we're waiting, for those that are joining us, if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, please feel free to do so, where you're joining us from. And if you want to put your LinkedIn profile in there so folks can connect, that would be great. Well, we will go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the November edition of Hummingbird Hour. My name is Nick Reich. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the president and chief operating officer here at Hummingbird Humanity. This is our last Hummingbird Hour of 2022. We'll be taking a much needed break for the holidays. And in fact, this is going to be our last Hummingbird Hour period. We are reimagining and reinventing this approach for 2023. So while we may not have a Hummingbird Hour, stay tuned for some exciting news with a new series that will launch in the new year. If you're not following us on social media at Hummingbird Humanity or signed up for our newsletter, please do so for some exciting announcements about what's to come in the new year here over the next couple of weeks. I am extremely excited for today's Hummingbird Hour. Been waiting for this for a while. I've known our speaker today for a number of years, and I'm extremely excited. So without further ado, I will introduce my colleague and today's moderator, JD. JD?
Thank you, Nick. Good morning, afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for, like Nick said, our last Hummingbird Hour. Very honored to be the one closing this chapter along with our guest for today, Cindy Nava. And we're so much looking forward to starting this conversation. First, we would like to talk about some things that are happening this month. Lindsay, there we go. So first, we want to acknowledge Transgender Awareness Week that is happening this week, which ends with Transgender Day of Remembrance on November 20th, which is a day honoring all of those trans folks who have been victims of violence all around the globe. But it's also a day to remember that there's also a lot of joy and success and stories that we need to share, so that all of the things that we hear aren't just tragedies about the trans community, but also of our successes, of the things we're doing. We just have our first trans men elected for office. So there's a lot of good things to also be thankful and grateful for in this moment. And also, this is a month to celebrate the rich and diverse cultures, traditions, and histories of Native people. Heritage Month is a time to educate the general public about the tribes, about their traditions, about the struggles that they're still going through. And one thing that I would like to acknowledge is that I am currently residing in Queens, New York, which is the native land of Lenape people. So I think we should always try to look at history and look at those people that were here before us and were displaced as we go into this awareness month for November. And Hummingbird Speaks. Hummingbird Speaks is one of our programs we offer that's focusing on amplifying voices and offering perspectives on diverse topics. Here we have some of those topics mentioned. I am a member of Hummingbird Speaks, and if you go to our website, hummingbirdhumanity.com, you can see a list of all of those various speakers that we have and all of the rich lived experiences that we bring when we talk about these topics, because we are all coming from a place of having lived some of these things and want to educate everyone else on how they can be allies for every community. And now I'd like to welcome today's guest, Cindy Nava. And I'm going to give a little bit of a bio of Cindy. A public policy advocate and former political strategist, Cindy has utilized the power of her lived experiences to empower communities of color, youth, and leaders across the country through her work in areas of policy, education, politics, leadership development, and advocacy. She believes in strengthening voices through civic engagement, education, and holistic methods rooted in innovative and transformational leadership practices, policies that support underserved communities across the country. As a former DACA recipient, Cindy has focused on opening access for immigrants interested in politics and begin a pathway to leadership development and training that creates opportunities for them to serve within those sectors. I mean, for me, it is a huge honor to be able to interview Cindy today, because as an immigrant myself, what she's doing and what she represents for our community is huge. And I don't think it should be understated whatsoever. She has marked a historical precedent after becoming the first undocumented person to intern at a national political party in Washington, D.C., and the first DACA recipient to work as a majority pool analyst for the New Mexico House of Representatives. Most recently, Cindy has served as a political director under U.S. Senator Ben Ray Lujan, as Chief Administrative Officer at the United States Hispanic Leadership Institute in Chicago, Illinois. Cindy served as an Executive Director of Transform Education in New Mexico, and most recently obtained an unprecedented White House presidential appointment, making her the first former DACA recipient in the US to become a political appointee. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you all to Cindy. Cindy, thank you so much for being here with us. Anything else you would like to say before we start?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. I am just very grateful for the opportunity to chat with everyone, and big shout outs to everyone joining from across the country. I'm monitoring and looking at the chat, Illinois, Miami. Hi, Brianna. And all over the country. Thank you all for sparing some time with us. And thank you for the invitation to Hummingbird Hour.
Thank you, Cindy. Now, before we start with some questions, I would just like to let everyone know, due to Cindy's role, there are questions we won't be able to answer, but we will let you know if that's the case. And also, we would really like to focus on the topic of hand, which is resiliency and Latinidad in the US. So let's start there with this conversation titled Generational Resiliency and Latinidad in the US. How would you define Latinidad in the US, and what does it mean for you?
Well, thank you for the question, JD. I think, and welcome everyone again. I think Latinidad can be very different for everyone. I hate it when we're put in a box, and I feel like I've been put in a box my whole life. And I grew up in New Mexico, okay? So go New Mexico. My New Mexico pride is incredibly strong. And if you've been to New Mexico, you ought to know that you have to come back and eat green chili, okay? And it's a green or red debate. So when I think of Latinidad, and when I think of New Mexico, there's all of these inner dilemmas of how we are identified as Latinos, Hispanics, Latinx, however we identify. There's a battle in between, but it has so much to do even with academic terms that have been placed upon our people as if we were some abstract concept, which we're not. Somos gente. And as this immigrant kid that I was when I arrived here, from Chihuahua, I can't tell you how long it took me to own who I was, to be proud of the language that I spoke, because I felt so marginalized. I wasn't out there saying I was Latina or, none of that. No. I was trying to fit into a space that I felt like I didn't belong to. And being undocumented made it 10 times worse, because I knew I couldn't do most of the things that my little friends could. And on that note, I have to tell you, growing up in New Mexico, Native American communities have been my brothers and sisters, hand in hand. And the alignment and the overlap of our struggles and hardships go hand in hand. And I think we have a lot to learn from one another. So on that note, also acknowledging Native American Heritage Month, very important. But that whole notion of identifying who we are, I think we as Latinos or Hispanics are very diverse. So first of all, we need to ensure that we're saying that loud and clear. We come in all colors and we don't fit a specific prototype. But because leadership and positions of power have for so long, excluded us from that, we haven't been able to say it loud and clear and say, hey, even if your family comes from, your heritage comes from Southern Mexico versus Northern Mexico, that is very different, okay? Very different. So I think learning that those things are our strengths and learning from one another and working together to build something bigger, that to me is the most important part. I don't care how we define ourselves as Latinos, Hispanics, whatever. We all have value to bring to the table, and we all have something to learn from one another. If we think we don't have anything to learn from one another, then we're done. Then I'm not doing anything for anyone. I quit. So I hold myself accountable to that, and I hold others accountable, because we shouldn't be here just to applaud our wins. I mean, we should be here to learn and to hold hands and to build bigger with the broader mindset and bringing and uplifting our stories. And I think that's something that I carry with me, and I see it as something that I have to do moving forward, especially when I speak to youth and young leaders, reminding them how important their language is, how important their culture and those values are. Because I, as a kid, wasn't told those things because my parents lived with so much fear. So for me, as I've been branded as a dreamer, as a doctor, as all these things. And people ask me, do you identify as that? And I mean, I have to, because that's been my pathway. But But when folks speak to me of this notion of like undocumented, unafraid, and unapologetic, I have to push back because my life has been filled with fear. And my parents are still living with that fear. So I can't lie to myself nor to my parents and look at them in the face and say, oh, I know we've never been afraid. That's a lie. That's a lie for me. And I think we should acknowledge the fact that we have diverse communities. We should be supporting one another. And if one of us wants to be the outsider being loud and clear, and the other one wants to be the insider, there is power in all of that. But the power comes when we work together to build something bigger.
Thank you, Cindy. So much to unpack, so many questions to follow that up. First, I love what you said about like we are so diverse. It's not a monolith. So there is going to be a difference in opinion, especially when it's scholars putting these terms, to Latinidad. There is a lot of Afro-Latinos, indigenous people who don't feel included in that term. And to your point of Native American heritage, I also hear a lot of people saying it's great that we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month, but also when it comes to Native American, indigenous, there is also that rich culture within Latinos that need to be included and acknowledged there. And to your experience immigrating here, it's something that we've talked about before that I very much relate to, because I also had that experience of coming here at a young age. And while not the same path that you took, it was a path where it took a long time to get naturalized. And there was a lot of living in fear of not being able to really be yourself and not knowing really who you are, because you're no longer in your land, yet you don't know which culture you are part of. So if you could just tell me a little bit more about that, just growing up, moving here, and that part of like having to hide really part of your identity, because you never know who you can trust. You never know who's going to just, in a moment of malice, just do something that could just affect you and your whole family. And so I know that we have a similar story of don't tell anyone anything about your family. Yet we go to school and everybody's like, tell us about your family and your origins.
Yes. No, that's totally true. And it resonates deeply. Because I think one of the things that I struggled with the most growing up was acceptance. And I didn't accept myself. I didn't accept so many things about who I was because I wanted to be someone else. So for a very long time, and ironically, one of my best friends, who's Native American, would tell me that she felt that she lived two different lives. And then I said, no, I lived two different lives. I mean, leaving my home, only Spanish, puro español, because my mom would not be happy if I was talking English and she didn't understand. And then to school, where I kept obsessing about pronunciation and ensuring that people couldn't figure me out. And I didn't hang out with the kids that spoke Spanish. A lot of trauma that I didn't even acknowledge until later on, because that's just not even talked about in our families, at least not in mine. And going to school and pretending to be someone I wasn't was forever something I had to carry out. I remember starting to intern at the New Mexico legislature, and I was mortified. I mean, I couldn't tell anyone that I was undocumented. DACA wasn't even in place yet. And I remember walking the hallways of the New Mexico legislature. And I've got to say, I mean, it might be a bias, but I think we have one of the most incredible legislatures in the country. And it's this round circle that represents the Zia symbol for us in New Mexico. So you just go around and it's this like round building that's really amazing. And I remember they always have speakers in the rotunda, so in the middle. And I would hear people speak, empowering days, depending on what they were celebrating. And I looked at them and I would always wonder and ask, like, God, when am I going to get to say the truth about who I am? Because I started to feel almost like choked because I couldn't say who I was. I played it out. No one could guess where I was coming from. I had people asking me like, oh, do you actually know how to speak Spanish? I was like, and then I got to the point where they would ask me, oh, how did you learn how to speak Spanish? And then I tell them, you should ask me how I learned to speak English. so it was this ironic battle with myself and acceptance. And I felt like I was someone who I was pretending to be someone who I wasn't at that legislature for such a long time. But then after that's when I started to find the importance of mentors and what they can do to change your life. I mean, I don't come from any means. I don't come from any influence. My mother is a housekeeper and my father is a construction worker until this day. So my life cannot be more ironic to go from that to sitting on a panel in the White House one random day. I mean, to hold emotions has been something that I think I've just come to the consensus that I will cry for the rest of my life. It might be internally, it might be externally, but because I feel that it's been such an ironic life, it hasn't been easy. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge, because there's a million Cindys out there, okay? A million Cindys. And I think I'm not telling just my story, because we're all over. And the importance is listening and watching out. And sometimes we may not be ready to tell you that we're undocumented and our families don't have that backing. And it wasn't until I had DACA that I finally was able to say, oh my God, okay, I can say it. I can say it because I feel a little bit of security. But it took me a lifetime. And folks, when they listen to me now, they're like, oh, you are so, we love all the reality that you bring to the table, blah, 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 and all the truth that you share. And I laugh because I tell them I was not like this. Okay. I've only been doing this since 2015 because I was so embedded with fear. And the reality is also that I don't think that's ever going to go away. Doesn't matter what I do, doesn't matter how much we accomplish, there is a trauma in there that forever, I think, will live through. But I hope that I can be sort of an agent to support others coming up those pipelines to ensure that they know that they're not the only ones, and that when we make it, that we better give back. I mean, again, because I've been disillusioned from so many people that I admired for many years. And when I got to meet them and how they were, it was sad. The sad reality was, they made it and they're going to keep going, but they don't have time for you. And I that's not me. That's not me. And there are so many people out there, and I just hope to be seen as a lending hand and an ally wherever I'm at.
Wow, thank you. Again, so many questions there, but the first one, what I heard that really resonated with me is the mentors and that really generational mentorship that you talk about. And I want to start with your first inspiration, which is something that we also have in common, that my biggest inspiration has been my grandmother. And so I know that for you, your Yaya Eva was really someone who inspired you to take that chance to get an education, to shoot for the stars, to really think of all the things that were possible. So I want you to tell me a little bit more about what having that person in your life meant to you, of that person who really just believes in you when you're just so unsure of everything.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I think I've been very blessed. Until this day, I continue to have a whole lot of mentors. I didn't even know what a mentor was initially. I'm going to do a shout out to Brian Colon, who I think is on there, and he's the New Mexico State Auditor. So many folks have crossed my paths, and I think it's important for us to remind ourselves that we ought to be holding ourselves accountable to serve as mentors and supporters to others. But the very first one of course, my parents, complete inspirations. But my yaya, my dad's mom, is a special place in my heart. And she was essentially, we just saw eye to eye with each other. And, she was a woman that was out of her time. She was born in a little farming town in Chihuahua. She was an incredibly smart woman. You would think she had like a PhD, but she only had, she had, I think, a 6th grade education, and she had to drop out of school. And she would tell me, Oh, Cindy, all I wanted to do was learn. And I wanted to be a nun. I didn't even want to get married to your grandpa, but then he appeared and I was like, okay, grandma, thank you. She didn't want to have kids, all of these things that I've never heard women her age say, she would tell me. And then whenever I would have hard time, because they would visit us twice a year. And whenever I'd have just hard times, I'd go crying to her and she would tell me, just ignore people, ignore and keep going, ignore and just keep going and keep trying hard. So, that was the mentality, because she just saw bigger, she saw broader, and she saw an opportunity. And her dream was to have an education, but she didn't have the opportunity to do it. So then it gets to my time. And then I have a lot of people, even within my own family, telling me like, oh, you don't have papers, Cindy, like, you're not going to be able to do much. So try to finish high school if you can. My parents were always very supportive. That was not them. But a lot of other noise was in the surrounding areas and all these expectations, cultural expectations that I always sort of went against. And my yaya was always there, just very supportive. And I will tell you, when DACA was implemented, there was a lot of pushback because people were not happy. It wasn't enough, blah, 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 blah. Well, again, I'm going to challenge this whole thing, because DACA changed our lives, and any undocumented student who is a beneficiary of DACA has to admit this, because it gave us a sense of weird empowerment or peace for our families and ability to work. And furthermore, it gave us the opportunity to travel. So my yaya got very sick in 2015. And if it wasn't for DACA, I wouldn't have been able to be by her side until her very last heartbeat. And that changed my life. I mean, I had never been back since I was a child. And I went into this country that I thought that was home. And then I get there and they're telling me that I'm a gringa, and I'm not a gringa. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I speak Spanish. I am from here. And they tell me, you speak weird Spanish. So I was like, okay, whatever. And I'm in this hospital and just seeing my yaya there, laying there, so helpless, and my dad on the phone, devastated. I knew I had to be the one pulling it together. And just the way she taught me about being resilient, and even when she was going to cry, she'd hold it together. I knew that I had to do that for her. So, I have this little necklace that I wear all the time, and it's like La Virgen, and this is my yaya's. So even though it's been hard to accomplish all these things now after she's been gone, I know that she walks with me. And whenever I walk into these spaces,
She's with you. She's with us right now.
I think the thing is walking into spaces that that I know her or my parents, will never have the opportunity to be at. That to me reminds me of the amount of responsibility that I feel and that I carry with me, because I don't carry business for Cindy. It is not for Cindy. It is about, what can I say that my parents would say that they'll never have the opportunity to say? What would my yaya say? Because they are a reflection of our communities across the country. So I just feel very blessed, but I feel a huge sense of responsibility and accountability, because the privileges that I get to have now would not have happened had it not been for all of their sacrifices.
And to that generational resilience, I want to follow up with they obviously your grandma and my grandma had tough lives, and then their kids came to this country and worked a lot of hours of the day so that we could have an education. And that also meant that we had to grow up very fast. We had to become adults and do things on our own because our parents were surviving. And so could you tell me a little bit about that resiliency? Because it's really what you've been able to accomplish in these 3 generations is awe-inspiring to me, in that it's really you are the embodiment of all of those dreams. But it didn't come easy. I know that it was also hard for you to be that tough person and have to be an adult and really show up in that way when other kids were just running around, playing, having fun.
Yeah, it's real. I mean, gosh, it's so much. From as far back as like remembering and thinking about doing sports in school, and I saw my little friends do them, and then I couldn't because my parents didn't have the money, and I couldn't go anywhere near any border town. So I had to start asking all these questions early, and even though it was so confusing at the beginning, I quickly learned it. You don't have this 9-digit number, which plays a huge role in everything you'll ever be able to do. So it was like this border wall thing that was placed in front of me without even trying. Like, oh yeah, you can aspire, but there's this wall. You can dream, but there is a block. So I think I've been going against the odds my entire life, and I do feel like I had to pull myself together earlier than any of my other friends, because I saw how hard my parents worked, and until this day they worked so incredibly hard. And I'm very proud, and sometimes they tell me, they're like, aren't you embarrassed to say what we do? And I've got to tell you, because as a kid, all of this shame that I had inside me, and it's probably one of my biggest regrets, because I was ashamed of where I came from. I was ashamed of the language. I was ashamed of what my parents did. I was ashamed of being poor, everything. But that became the biggest sort of like slap in the face for me, because that is my biggest strength. That is what motivates me every single day, that I feel that my life is so ironic, because I call my mom and I call my dad and ¿dónde andan? Oh, I'm limpiando una casa, or cleaning at home, or fixing this house, or, I mean, it's just, any of the jobs that I ever have, and I have told this to myself and I tell this to others, never will I have a job as difficult as the ones that they've done, and as the things that they have to do to survive, and the disrespect that they've been faced with, and all of those ironies. And I take that to heart, because they are devoted folks, and they are here because of my siblings and I. And had they not done that, we wouldn't be here. And of course, this notion of resilience, somebody just like last week, they asked me, hey, Cindy, because of your story, blah, 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 we want to know, do you think resilience could be taught? Could we have a course on resilience? And I sat there, I was thinking about it. Like, okay, this is very interesting. And I told this guy, well, I hope you don't think that I took a course on resilience, because that was not what happened. But those things just happen, I think, and we make decisions throughout life that make us, take those tough choices, and we decide. But I think acknowledging the work that others do so that we can do better, that is so important. And I remember seeing my parents do this their entire life. They used to clean a library when we were little. And I remember them taking us to the library in the evenings, like at 8:00, because no one could watch us. And they would tell us, okay, siéntense aquí, like sit in this little corner. You guys can play with the books. I'm sure that was probably not supposed to have happened, okay? But we just sat there and read books. And they would go and pull out the trash cans and change the trash. And then many years later, I passed by this library. Oh my gosh. And I just sat there crying, because that's the library that my parents used to, to clean. So this happened throughout our entire lives. And it got to the point where we were helping my parents, change out the trash. So in all of my roles now, whenever I see the cleaning people, I can't even explain to you what it means to smile and to say hello to them, because I see my parents in them. and the people that I'm working with, that's not necessarily the space that they come from. So I think it's a little weird to them sometimes. But I think those are the spaces where we need to be at, because hard work is hard work, and we need to be acknowledged and applauded for it. And I don't think communities are, have that enough. So I think I will forever feel sort of out of place. But I have learned that it is so important to say those things in those spaces, because if I don't say them, no one will say them. And that is a responsibility that I think we should be conscious enough to carry out, and to be willing to work with others so that we can improve those spaces for the future folks that are going to be coming and aspiring to these things and these positions. And thankfully, we live in a country where I believe that we absolutely can. But I think that takes hard work and collaborative efforts.
I love that you talk about acknowledgement, and particularly for people in service roles, because my dad is a server. And I remember growing up, I didn't want to say that sometimes in school, when people are like, oh, my dad is a professor and my mom is a doctor. And now looking back, it feels so silly, because it's, wow, there is really so much pride in all of that hard work and all the effort that it took for us to get to where we are now, and to acknowledge those people and saying hello to them and smiling. It makes them feel visible, because so many people don't acknowledge them in those spaces. And it's to your point about responsibility, it's a responsibility to make sure those people feel seen and heard, that they are not just doing this job and they don't really matter. It's, no, we see you and we thank you for what you're doing, because we know that with this effort, you are doing things for your children. You are trying to advance other things. And so to never let that go unacknowledged. I want to talk about acknowledging also other people that you've mentioned helped you along the way. We talked about your yaya as a mentor. Then there also have been other mentors in your life, such as Michelle Grisham, who invited you to the White House. So if you could tell me about that experience of just what it means for someone to open those doors for you and help you along the way.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, God, I can't even tell you the amount of mentors I've had, but so Michelle Lujan Grisham was a congresswoman in 2015, which I think that's when I went to the White House for the first time. She's now sitting governor of New Mexico. And I had no status yet. Okay. I didn't have DACA yet, nothing. And I remember getting this call from someone in her staff, and they asked me, hey, what are you doing for Cinco de Mayo? I was like, what do you mean? I don't know, nothing. I don't celebrate Cinco de Mayo. And they said, well, the congresswoman wants to invite you. And I didn't know where. And they said DC. And then they said the White House. And I was like dying on the phone, crying. And then, my parents were like, absolutely not. What do you mean? You're going to get deported? Like, how are you can't go? And I said, no, they assured me I'm going to be fine. I mean, I was kind of a risk. So I remember, I get to DC, and I had already been in DC for like engagement and things that I had been like just involved in as a student. But I remember getting picked up and being taken to the White House with her, and, going through security. And I mean, my stomach was hurting, but then I remember just walking in, and I remember her telling me, are you okay? And I said, yeah. I mean, I just started looking at the walls and all of these folks that I've been studying, right, my entire life. And I know that I'm completely undocumented, and I don't know how in the world I got in. And I don't even have enough words to tell you what I felt at that moment. I felt seen. That's the word. I felt seen, and I felt like I belonged. And it was life-changing. That same day, I got to visit the then vice president home, who is now our current president, and actually got to talk to him. Actually cried, and he cleaned my tears. And I spoke to him about being undocumented. And the fact that we don't necessarily get those opportunities, especially as someone who comes from the places that I come from. I mean, my abuelos in Chihuahua, and it was before my yaya passed away, they were booming on the phone, watching the news to see if Cindy came out with, with the president, and to talk to them and tell them and have this discussion with them and see their excitement. That to me was everything. So it was life-changing. And I told her that, and I said, I just want you to know that you didn't just change my life. You just changed the lives of my entire family, of my abuelos who are sitting in Chihuahua, trying to watch the news to see if I pop out anywhere. But my parents who are in disbelief and mortified, so those things I think need to be acknowledged as well, that just one little thing, you may think that you're doing something very small for someone, and that becomes life-changing and transformative for them. So I've seen that along my journey, and I'm very blunt about the fact that it's important to be grateful, but to not forget that we are going to get the opportunity one day to replicate that and to do it for someone else, because it's so important. And when we, again, don't come from access, we don't have a tío or a tía that can be like, oh, I'm going to take you to Congress, or I'm going to take you to a visit to the legislature. That doesn't happen. I mean, that there's no way. I mean, yeah, maybe my tia was the cleaning lady, but like, they're not gonna, they don't have the ability to take you. So for me to be able to get into these spaces where I've always sort of been the solo player in there, that's forced me to ensure that I'm talking and that I'm speaking, because if I don't do it, nadie lo va a hacer. And learning to be proud of where I come from. And now I'm very intentional, okay, about even speaking Spanish in places where people are like, oh, what? And I do it on purpose. I do it on purpose because now I have this privilege of being able to be in the darn room that I know others don't. So I have to do it. And sometimes I ask myself and say, I don't know if I can be blunt sometimes, painfully blunt. But I think it's important because we are not some abstract concept. Our communities are not an abstract concept. And I think the acknowledgement of recognizing the issues that we have to deal with day in and day out is very important. And we need to ensure that those people are coming up those pathways to serve in those leadership positions, so that these people understand the power, the resilience, and the empowerment that can be generated if we diversify those folks in leadership, because I think it matters, and representation absolutely matters.
Representation absolutely matters, and you are really living proof of that for so many DACA dreamers. I mean, it's you are showing by example what can be achievable, the things that you weren't able to hear from others when you were growing up. You can now just actually show, like, hey, here I am. You can do it. But I know it wasn't always like that, you talk about being scared and, of not knowing where you are, and about assimilation. Like, we as kids, you kind of just assimilate to this. If you could tell me, how did you arrive to being like proud of those roots and like reconnecting with those roots, especially as when you go back home, and I've had this too, it's you sound weird, you don't talk the same, and it's don't talk while we're at the market because they'll raise the prices of things. And so how were you able to navigate that and get to a place where you're like, actually, maybe I'm not for here or there, but I still have all of this rich culture that's part of me, and I'm proud of that?
I think I was forced into I have to tell you, I think I had no option. I had no option because I still haven't had even the opportunity to spend as much time as I probably, now in Mexico and reconnect, because it's been hard, because the times when I went back to Mexico, it was because my grandmother passed away and then my abuelo passed away. And I had to play the role that my father wasn't able to play. So there's a lot of pain, and I'm always fearful, and I haven't been back since my abuelo passed away, and it's been over 2 years now. And the pain is just very real, and I can't even describe it. So I haven't had the opportunity, I think, to reconnect with the country where I was born, and maximizing it. But in terms of sort of accepting and being proud, it was because I kept being in places where I heard others diminish people like my parents. And if Cindy didn't say anything, I was passing, so I would pass for whatever I wanted to be. And I sounded like them, so they didn't question me. So they weren't going to say like, oh no, yeah, these immigrants, blah, 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 they're good people. I kept being in spaces where I heard people diminishing people like my parents. And that was it. I had enough. Like something clicked, and I started speaking out and saying, well, no, you know what? My parents are immigrants. I'm an immigrant. And then that's when I started to even, speak Spanish and say things. And then I had the opportunity to even testify at the legislature, which was really outing myself there. Like that was very scary because some members were not necessarily going to be the biggest fans, and I knew that. But I spent a lot of time as an intern for free because I couldn't be paid. But there were some legislators that gave me the opportunity to just say, hey, if you want to come today or this week or whatever. So I did that over and over and over again for like 10 years, and to the point where I knew everyone and everyone loved me, but they didn't know who Cindy really was. So then by the time that I said the truth, it was funny because I had won people over, and then they couldn't just come back and hate me. And I established relationships across the aisle, and all of those things because they saw me as a human, not as, oh, this person or whatever they wanted to call me. They saw me as a human and as someone who was trying to do something bigger for more than myself. And I knew that once I was in those roles, even in student government in college, okay, when I was trying to join, they told me, oh, you can't do it because you don't have a social, so we can't give you the stipend. Well, I went and had an advocate, another leader of one of the Latino Resource Center at the university. She went and had a whole conversation with this other woman. They ended up giving me my stipend. I became, I was government relations director. And they told me, we've never had anyone undocumented, so we don't know how to do this. So I think I've played this weird role of like having to teach people over and over and over and over. And we're learning together because I don't know the process and they didn't know the process and they were fearful. So I started to speak up more and more and more because I was breaking into these weird little spaces where there weren't other Cindys. But then after I asked those questions, and they were like, oh, I guess we can do it. So it's about, I think, really, I think it's really important to as uncomfortable as it is to come into spaces where we are not represented. I think those are the most important places to be at, because we need to challenge the fact that our communities are changing, our demographics are shifting, and we need that representation at the table. Just one random person can't claim to understand all communities and claim to know what's in their best interest or our best interest. Because I always tell them, it's like this whole notion of immigration reform. And when we talk about, the hassle between being able to come together for a consensus, I would always say, well, I think it's probably easier for you to go advocate if you don't have to go back and look at your parents' faces who don't have any type of access. Because if you saw them, and if you went and asked my dad, would you prefer to have even some sort of a visa initially, to start off with, or would you just only want citizenship and nothing at all? Because that's what's happened before. And he laughs and says, that's ridiculous. I will start wherever I need to start to prove whoever I need to prove, because this is what I've been doing and this is what I'll continue to do. And I'm going to continue working regardless. So the resilience that my parents and my dad just carried through has woken me up many times because they don't even have to tell me. They don't have to say. And my dad will say, oh, no, I don't know. I don't like to speak in public and blah, blah, blah. But my dad quietly, his actions speak louder than words. So to me, That's what matters. And I think it's important to look beyond our own life and how we're affected, because we can't make it all about ourselves. Look at your community, look at who you're representing, look at who you're truly working with and how they're affected. Don't look at just yourself, because sure, we can do parties for ourselves about, our struggles and our dilemmas, but we're not lonely at this game. We are a much bigger, broader country, and we are so diverse. And I think we need to ensure that those stories are being told and that they're being uplifted, and that we don't get sucked into this game of egocentrism, of just being ourselves.
Thank you, Cindy. Of course, I'd love to also acknowledge your parents and all of their work, and like you said, speaking through actions. But I also want to acknowledge you, because I heard you say something that I always say is, I didn't have a choice, but I feel like there is always a choice to whether you want to take this on or not. And so there's a lot of credit to be given there of that you chose the harder path so that it would be easier for those to come after you. So I want to close with another question and then pass it to the questions that folks are asking. What is your vision for the future for both yourself and for future generations of Latinos, Latinas, Latines, who want to get involved in social and political issues and really pursue the dream that our parents have wanted for us?
Have a lot of vision. Very hopeful. I am an optimist by heart, and I hate it. I'm not a fan of pessimism, and because I've seen my parents work through these struggles, right? And always just with the head up. So to me, it's about just continuing to expand opportunities and expand spaces for us and for others to have the opportunity to also shine, to also uplift those communities that have not been there at the table, to create spaces where we are leading, where our communities are sitting in leadership positions, because it shouldn't be about the leadership position, but unfortunately it matters, because there's decisions that get made, and who better to speak on those issues than those that have lived it. So I think that is very important to me. The whole notion of representation is real, and I carry it wholeheartedly. And it needs to be across sectors, and it's to be politically, and it's to be, the nonprofit world. It needs to be, in all sectors, having our communities be represented at the table and leading those conversations is incredibly important. As a woman, it's incredibly important, because it's sort of another layer of challenges that we're adding to the table. So to me, it's very important to also empower and uplift young women of color and remind them of how valuable their voices are. And as someone who struggled with a lot of these issues of acceptance, and even, just body image acceptance of like, oh, I'm never enough, or all these things that are imposed upon you, it's really extra important to me to ensure that we are creating these spaces and opening them, and ensuring that we are helping and supporting people into leadership positions, to ensure that the policies that are created and the future that lies ahead has more opportunities for those that are coming.
Thank you so much, Cindy. I could talk to you all day. But I do also want to get to some of the questions that folks are asking, and please, everyone in the chat, if you have any questions for Cindy, we still have a few minutes left. One person asked, I'd like to ask Cindy how she manages and carries the privilege, power, and responsibility that comes with being a first-generation professional.
Well, thank you all. And by the way, I've been looking at the chat, so thank you for the love and support. I'm really, really grateful. De corazón. And okay, so how I manage being a first-gen professional and everything else, right? Is the question?
Yes. How do you carry that privilege, power, and responsibility, but also celebration of being a first-generation professional in this country?
Who asked the question? What was the name of the person?
Lindsay, do you know?
Okay, I would just wanted to acknowledge.
Okay.
But no,
Okay.
no, no, thank you. Well, thank you for the question. Uh,
Oh,
it's
it was
been a learning.
submitted anonymously. Sorry. Anonymous.
Okay, well, anonymous individual. Thank you for your question. It's been a learning game. It's been a learning game. Day after day, year after year. Life throws hardships at us left and right. So being a professional to me is just, I feel privileged to be called a professional, first gen. So I don't even take it into account because I think the sort of the hardships that I've had to overcome have been so much more difficult for me, and more traumatic. But one of those hardships last year, by the way, just to add up on my interesting life, weirdly interesting, I had this random headache last year, ended up being a brain tumor, everyone. Thank God, a non-cancerous brain tumor. But anyway, I ended up undergoing brain surgery a year ago, August, 1 year ago. So my life was put on pause and it was horrendous and I couldn't believe it. And I was angry and I was mad and I was upset and I was fearful. And then I reminded myself and I said, oh my gosh, I think my whole life has been prepping me for this. So when I go into surgery, if I don't come out, that's God and that's the path. And I'm going to be thankful for what I've had and for the time that I've had. But if I come out and I come out alive and well, then I know that there's so much ahead and I have to do it even better. And Lord behold, I came out. Okay. So to me, all of those things, the fact that I'm alive, I'm grateful for, because I didn't expect that to happen to me. And to think of all those things of being a professional and all those responsibilities to me is just, carry forward, Cindy, and continue doing more. And remember, it's for a broader reason because you don't have life secured, and to have to learn that. So, at this age has been interesting, but it takes me back to my yaya and the fact that, that resilience lives within everyone. And I think you just nurture it and you just carry forward con ganas and with that optimism in mind, and I think things work. They work out. They really do.
Thank you, Cindy. I see Mark has his hand raised. If we can.
It's not a question, it's a comment. Sorry, Jade, I told you a question, but I was like, I think I just have time for a comment. Sydney, I met Oprah once in New York City, and at the Apollo, I went to her event for Super Soul Sunday Conversations, and she was speaking to Yara Shahidi, the actress and activist from Blackish and Grownish, and she had repeated a quote that Maya Angelou said to her, which was, "Baby, your future is so bright, it burns my eyes." And when I think about you, Sydney, and what you represent, it causes me to get emotional. It also causes my eyes to burn because your future is so bright and we need more people like you. We need more stories like yours, amplified, shared. So I want to thank you for sharing your story with us today. I want to thank you for all of your hard work and making this time possible, knowing your schedule. And I want to thank JD for being a vessel and conduit and moderator for this conversation because it was deeply, deeply moving. And thank you both.
Thank you all so much. And however I can be of help and resource. And thank you, JD. Gracias. And I think my LinkedIn file was thrown in there, but if not, just Cindy Nava. I'm on social. I'm always happy to help and always here to be a supportive hand and to continue moving forward.
Thank you, Cindy. I'd like to close with one thing and just hear any other thoughts you have on it. Something that you shared in your TEDx talk that I watched is hope gives us courage.
I live by that. I live by that, and being in the midst of that brain surgery, that's exactly where it took me back to. That hope gave me the courage. And I think moving forward, that's what will carry me forward with everything that I do, with the aspirations that I've yet to tackle. And if one day I get to serve in any shape, way, or form in an elected fashion, that's something that I think that I'll hold very close to my heart, and I encourage everyone to hold it close to their hearts, to carry us forward, because life isn't easy, and every single one of you is, has their own challenges. But I just want to thank you for whatever your work and your willingness to spend this time with us, because you're acknowledging the importance of this conversation. And I think, again, holding hands and walking this path in a unified fashion makes us all better. And I think we expand the table for those that need to be here. So those would be my closing words, but thank you all so much.
Thank you so much for this conversation, Cindy. And you definitely make me feel hopeful. You definitely make me feel more courageous about just being able to do things in the world. So thank you so much for spending this time with us. I want to thank everyone who came up and showed up today to hear our conversation. And I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their day and continues this message of hope and of courage. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.